Black CEO walked away from $900 million because they disrespected her. The black CEO thought it was just another dinner where she would make a $900 million deal. But the billionaire family showed disrespect for her skin color. She did not tolerate such behavior, so listen to how it turned out. The butler didn't even look up when she entered. Tall glass doors parted with a hushed whisper as Morgan Taylor stepped into the marble foyer of the Bellamy estate. Black heels clicking sharply against white stone floors, echoing off oil paintings and lineage-heavy portraits. She was 10 minutes early for the summit, but no one greeted her. Not that she expected confetti, but the silence was pointed. She cleared her throat lightly. "Good morning. I'm here for the strategy summit. Taylor Technologies." The butler blinked, then motioned toward the back with a stiff nod. "Delivery entrance is around the side. Catering's unloading now." Morgan paused, the moment laced with disbelief. Her tailored charcoal suit, sharp enough to slice, her sleek laptop case, and her confident stride said one thing. But her skin said something else to him. "I'm not with catering," she said evenly. "I'm Morgan Taylor, CEO." The butler's eyes flickered, surprise, then mild embarrassment, but no apology. "Ah, I see. Well then, they're waiting in the East Solarium." Morgan walked past him without another word, her jaw set. She'd been invited to close the biggest deal of her career, a $900 million acquisition offer from Bellamy Holdings. The room she was walking into could change her company's future forever. And yet, as she passed bronze busts of long-dead industrialists, the stale air whispered the same question over and over. "What are you doing here?" And not in the curious sense. In the territorial, "this isn't your place" kind of way. As she turned the corner, voices filtered through the air, men laughing, wine glasses clinking. She paused just outside the solarium, steeling herself. Morgan Taylor had bootstrapped her startup from a laptop in a South Side studio apartment to one of the most buzzed-about AI firms in the country. She'd walked into worse rooms, but none with this much money or this much condescension. She pushed the door open. 12 white men in suits turned to look at her. Some blinked. One actually smirked. None stood. Then someone muttered, "Must be the brand consultant." Morgan smiled politely. "No, just the woman who built the tech you're about to pay almost $1 billion for." Silence. She stepped forward, extended a hand. "Nice to meet you all. Let's talk business." But it was already clear, this would be no ordinary meeting. They shook her hand like she was radioactive. A few offered curt nods. Others just exchanged glances over her head, like her presence disrupted the room's natural order. Morgan took a seat at the long mahogany table, opposite Charles Bellamy III, patriarch of the Bellamy dynasty, eyes cool behind rimless glasses, suit the color of old money and older rules. He smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was performance. A carefully curated smirk that said, "I own more than you've ever seen, and I don't need to tell you that." "We've reviewed your numbers," Charles said, gesturing to a sleek leather folder that no one had opened. Impressive scale for such a lean operation. Very modern. Morgan smiled tightly. "We built it that way. Efficiency is the future." A junior exec leaned in from the side. "Or just good marketing." It was casual, said with a chuckle, as though Morgan were a walking brand campaign, not a coder who'd written the original algorithm in her kitchen while working 2 jobs. Another exec chimed in. "What's the term they use? Black girl magic? You've certainly leveraged that well." Laughter. Morgan's grip on her pen tightened, but her face remained serene. She'd sat through worse, pitched to worse, survived worse. But that didn't make it less venomous. Charles sipped his scotch. "Let's be honest, Miss Taylor. What you've built is impressive, but what we're offering is structure, legacy, real capital. Your product is hot right now, but we're the ones who make things last." Morgan's eyes flicked around the table. Structure, legacy, capital, control. She closed her folder slowly. "I didn't come here for validation. I came here to hear the final terms." A thin man with slicked back hair cleared his throat. "Final terms stand. $900 million for 80% equity. You keep a board seat, ceremonial, of course. We'll manage day-to-day." "Ceremonial?" like a statue in a museum. Something to be pointed at, not heard. Morgan leaned back in her chair. The sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the table. In that light, their smiles looked like masks. She realized then, they hadn't invited her here to partner. They'd invited her to disappear. Morgan held her breath for exactly 3 seconds. That was her rule. Whenever someone said something so absurd, so quietly insulting, so wrapped in wealth and white teeth, it passed as reasonable. She gave herself 3 seconds to breathe. 1, 2, 3. She smiled. Ceremonial. That's an interesting word choice. Slick hair leaned in, confident. You'd still be involved. You'd have visibility into decisions, of course. But not authority, Morgan replied. Well, he shrugged, as if the difference were semantics. This isn't personal. It's structural. Companies of this scale require seasoned leadership. She tilted her head. You mean white-haired leadership? A few chuckles died in throats. Chairs shifted. The youngest man at the table, maybe late 30s, looked genuinely uncomfortable. Charles, still sipping his scotch, didn't flinch. No need to be combative. We all have roles to play. You're the visionary. We're the infrastructure. Morgan turned her gaze toward the window, letting the silence bloom awkwardly around her. The estate's grounds were stunning. Perfectly manicured lawns stretching toward the horizon. Generational wealth tended to do that, turn land into legacy. But she hadn't built tailored technologies on old soil. She had built it on risk, on sleepless nights, on rejection, on eating top ramen and pitching angel investors in coffee shops that smelled like bleach and disappointment. And now they wanted to treat her like the campaign, not the architect. So, Morgan said finally, voice calm. Let me get this straight. I create the product, build the brand, grow the user base, then hand it over so I can smile at luncheons and send thank you tweets? Charles smiled that same tight smile. You're not being replaced. You're being elevated. Morgan laughed softly. Is that what you tell your maids when you call them house managers? A hush fell again. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her tone was knife-sharp. You didn't fly me here to treat me like a peer, she continued. You flew me here to make me small. No one responded. Because she was right. The silence sat heavy. A tension they weren't used to, at least not from people who looked like her. Then Charles chuckled, slow and measured. Miss Taylor, if I may, perhaps you're misreading our intentions. Morgan raised an eyebrow. Am I? Another executive chimed in, his smile too wide to be sincere. Look, no one's questioning your talent. You clearly have a good instinct for business. But scaling a tech firm into a multinational is a different ballgame. A third one added, this is how the system works. Visionaries build. Institutions scale. Morgan leaned forward. You mean visionaries bleed? And institutions brand them as liabilities the moment they speak up. That word, liabilities, sliced through the room. A woman like her, in a room like this, refusing to play grateful. That wasn't just disruptive. It was dangerous. The youngest man, seated near the end of the table, cleared his throat, finally finding the courage to speak. With respect, you're the reason we're here. We're interested because you made something that works. Morgan looked at him, and for the first time since entering this space, she saw the flicker of something not soaked in entitlement, sincerity. But it wasn't enough to balance the weight of the rest. Because just then, a server, black, young, maybe college age, entered the solarium with a tray of sparkling water. As he passed, one of the older execs quipped, Careful there, don't spill on the founder. The others chuckled. Morgan's face didn't move, but her chest tightened. It wasn't directed at her. Not technically, but it was. They didn't see him. Not really. Just like they didn't see her. Just roles. Just uniforms. One wore a tray. The other wore a suit. But in their eyes, neither belonged. She glanced at the young man. Their eyes met for half a second, and she knew he'd heard it too. She turned back to the table. Tell me something, she said. How many companies like mine have you bought in the last 5 years? Charles raised a brow. We've closed 31 acquisitions. And how many of those founders looked like me? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. No one spoke. For a room full of men who claimed to run the world, they suddenly had nothing to say. Morgan let the quiet drag. Let it choke the air. She'd learned a long time ago. Silence was a weapon, too. She leaned back slowly, her tone colder now. Right? That's what I thought. Charles placed his glass down a little too hard. We're here to talk about business, not identity politics. Morgan's eyes sharpened. Everything about this is identity politics. You just call it tradition. The room shifted. Shoulders stiffened. Arrogance curdled into defensiveness. One of them tried to lighten the mood with a chuckle. You're clearly passionate. That's good. It plays well with the media. Morgan looked at him, deadpan. I'm not here to play. Another spoke up, gray beard, double cufflinks, heavy watch. Look, this attitude isn't helping your valuation. Investors look for composure, not confrontation. Morgan blinked slowly. You invited me here to offer less than my company's worth, strip me of control, insult my intelligence, and now you're giving me advice on tone. She pushed her chair back. It made a sharp sound against the polished floor. Let me tell you something, she said, voice like steel. I've pitched to rooms that look just like this. I've been underestimated, ignored, talked over. But I never begged. And I sure as hell didn't bend. Charles stood abruptly. Are you walking away from nearly $1 billion? Morgan gathered her folder, stood to her full height, and met his gaze without blinking. No, she said. I'm walking away from people who think I'm lucky to be at their table. I built my own. Then she turned and walked out. She didn't rush. Morgan moved through the estate like she owned it. Not like someone storming out, but like someone choosing herself, step by deliberate step. The butler who had mistaken her for staff earlier now stood frozen as she passed. He started to speak, then thought better of it. The air outside hit different. Lighter. Cleaner. She exhaled as she stepped onto the grand circular drive, heels clicking across stone like punctuation marks. Her driver jumped out of the black SUV the moment he saw her. Everything all right, Miss Taylor? She nodded once. Better than all right. As the door closed behind her and the car rolled down the long driveway, she finally allowed herself to feel it. Not regret. Not anger. Relief. The estate shrank in the rearview mirror. So did the men inside it. In the silence of the ride, her phone buzzed. A message from her CFO, who'd stayed behind in the city, waiting for the deal to close. Confirmation signed yet. Morgan stared at the screen. Her thumbs hovered, then typed. Deal's dead. We'll build without them. 3 dots pulsed on the screen. Then came the reply. Damn. You sure? Morgan tapped her response slowly, each word deliberate. My company is worth more than their approval. And so am I. By the time Morgan reached her office, the whispers had already started. Insiders called it a missed opportunity. Analysts questioned her judgment. Headlines read, Tech CEO walks away from $900 million. Ego or principle? Unprecedented deal collapse raises eyebrows in Silicon circles. Some called her brave, others reckless. But Morgan didn't flinch. She sat at the head of a long conference table, surrounded by her core team. Diverse, sharp, the same people who had stayed when they had nothing but hope and a prototype. They think we lost something, her COO muttered, scanning her tablet. Twitter's eating it up, saying you could have changed the system from the inside. Morgan leaned forward. I didn't walk out to change their system. I walked out to protect ours. She tapped her laptop and played a video, her own statement, recorded just minutes before walking into the Bellamy estate. She had prepared for both outcomes. I knew the moment I stepped into that room, her voice said in the video. I'd be treated like an exception, not a peer. But I didn't build this to be anyone's token. I built it to be a force. She posted the clip. By noon, it was viral. Hashtag not your token trended worldwide. Emails poured in from young founders, women of color, people who had swallowed disrespect in boardrooms and called it strategy. Morgan didn't need to tell the world what happened in that solarium. She showed them who she was when it counted. And that said everything. The Bellamy Group didn't respond at first. They assumed it would blow over. That Morgan would come back. Quietly. Maybe with a better lawyer. Maybe with a softer tone. That's how these things usually went. But this wasn't usual. Within 48 hours, Morgan's clip had been reshared by every major tech outlet. Her refusal had become a symbol, one that echoed in boardrooms, classrooms, and comment sections across the world. A Forbes columnist wrote, "In a world where selling out is expected, Morgan Taylor set a new bar, walked away from nearly $1 billion without blinking. That's not ego. That's clarity." Then came the investors. 3 venture capital firms reached out within days, offering fresh funding at double the original valuation. Not for majority control, just partnership. "Come build with us," they said. "On your terms." Morgan didn't answer right away. Not because she needed to think, but because she understood what power really looked like. Not chasing seats at someone else's table, but deciding which rooms you walk into and which ones you leave behind. Meanwhile, inside Bellamy Holdings, panic brewed behind closed doors. Shareholders wanted answers. Charles Bellamy was suddenly unavailable for interviews. Their PR team scrambled to clarify the situation. One internal memo leaked. "We underestimated the cultural impact of Ms. Taylor's departure." But they hadn't underestimated her. They disrespected her. And now the world had seen it. It wasn't just headlines anymore. In tech circles, founders started reevaluating offers. Public forums brimmed with stories from women, from Black entrepreneurs, from people who had swallowed slights to stay in the room. But now, they had language for something deeper than frustration. They had an example. Morgan Taylor's name came up at panel discussions, startup incubators, business schools. A viral tweet read, "She didn't just walk out of that deal. She walked through the door they tried to close behind her, and left it open for the rest of us." A young founder in Atlanta launched a Slack group named Build Loud, dedicated to sharing resources for underrepresented founders. Within 48 hours, it had 10,000 members. One VC firm publicly changed their acquisition policies, citing Morgan by name. Meanwhile, journalists dug deeper into Bellamy Holdings. Articles surfaced about similar patterns: founders stripped of authority after deals, brands whitewashed, cultures erased. Suddenly, it wasn't just Morgan's story. It was a pattern, a mirror, and people were tired of their reflections being erased. Back at Taylor Technologies, Morgan watched the storm grow, not as a spectacle, but as proof. Proof that dignity isn't a liability. That walking away doesn't mean walking alone. And most importantly, proof that the cost of self-respect isn't a loss. It's an investment. A week after the walkout, Morgan sat in a quiet cafe, not far from where she'd pitched her company's first prototype 5 years earlier. No assistants, no entourage, just her, a laptop, and a notebook scarred with coffee stains and sleepless scribbles. That's when the email came in. Subject: "Let's talk, your way." It was from a major impact investment firm. Not flashy, not legacy-backed, but respected. Quiet power. The message was short. "We saw what you did. We understand why. If you're still building, we want in. Zero conditions. No board power grabs. We fund people, not just products. Say the word." Morgan stared at the screen, expression unreadable. It wasn't about the money anymore. It never really had been. It was about the terms. About what power looks like when you don't have to shrink to keep it. She drafted a reply, then paused. Instead of clicking send, she opened her calendar. Booked time with her leadership team. Because this time, there would be no private rooms. No hush-hush conversations behind gilded doors. The next deal, if there was one, would be transparent, equitable, built in daylight. And if anyone didn't like that, they weren't invited. It started with one internal email. Morgan titled it, "Not just a company, a culture." She outlined a bold pivot, not in product, but in purpose. "We're not just building tech," it read. "We're building precedent." Within days, Taylor Technologies launched a new initiative, Founders First, a mentorship and equity-sharing program for early-stage startups led by marginalized creators. 10% of her company's revenue would fund it. No strings, no lip service. Real capital, real ownership. And it shook the industry. While other CEOs held press conferences, Morgan held space for overlooked founders, for engineers who never saw someone like them at the top, for people told they were too passionate or not polished enough. She gave them resources, but more importantly, she gave them visibility. She didn't just keep her seat, she expanded the table. One of her engineers, a quiet coder from Oakland, said it best at a team meeting. You didn't just walk out of that deal, Morgan. You built a door where there wasn't one. Morgan smiled. Because legacy, she realized, isn't defined by the money you take. It's defined by the things you refuse to trade for it. It came too late. A glossy press release from Bellamy Holdings titled, "A Commitment to Diverse Innovation." It mentioned Morgan by name, but not the meeting, not the comments, not the smirks or the silence. Charles Bellamy himself appeared in a staged video, flanked by advisors of color who hadn't been in that solarium. He spoke of unfortunate misunderstandings and missed opportunities for partnership. But the world had already moved on. Comments flooded in. This is what accountability looks like when you're afraid of shareholders, not when you're sorry. Morgan didn't need your apology. She needed your respect. You missed your chance. Meanwhile, Morgan remained quiet. No clapbacks, no counterstatements, just progress. Her company crossed a new milestone that same week, 20 million users. Her internal valuation tripled. When asked by a journalist if she had any thoughts on the Bellamy statement, Morgan simply said, "Power is knowing when you don't need to respond." And that was that. They had underestimated her silence, just like they had underestimated her presence. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's grace. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. It wasn't the money they remembered. It was the moment. Months later, in a packed auditorium at a tech leadership summit, Morgan Taylor stood beneath a single spotlight. No slides, no pitch deck, just her voice. She didn't talk about her exit valuation, or the viral tweet storm, or the near-billion-dollar deal she'd walked away from. She talked about the meeting. She described the quiet, polished hostility, the way legacy disguised itself as logic, the laughter when she was supposed to smile and nod and be grateful, and how she didn't. She ended her talk with a single sentence. "They offered me everything, except respect, so I chose myself." The audience rose before she even stepped off the stage. Afterward, a teenage girl in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. "I want to build something," she said quietly, "but I'm scared of the rooms." Morgan knelt to her level, looked her straight in the eyes. "Then change the rooms, or build new ones, and never trade your dignity for their comfort." The girl nodded, and in that moment, the baton passed, not to one person, but to thousands. Morgan hadn't just disrupted an industry. She had redefined what it meant to win, not by the billions offered, but by the line she drew. A new standard, etched not in contracts, but in courage. And everyone saw it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe me and hit the notification bell to not miss new stories. Bye.